The first thing I felt when I woke up was confusion, a kind of cold, sharp confusion that had nothing to do with the hours I'd spent in restless sleep. It was a feeling that settled in my bones as soon as I opened my eyes, as if I had crossed some invisible threshold, though I didn't yet know what awaited me on the other side. The bed felt too soft, too unfamiliar, as though it were no longer my own, and for a moment I wasn't sure if I was still in the same reality. The light from the window cast an unnatural glow across the room, throwing long, disjointed shadows over the polished floors and sleek furniture. It wasn't the warm, comforting light of mornings I had grown used to. It was cold and indifferent, highlighting the emptiness between us. I could hear Clara's gentle breathing beside me. It was the only thing that anchored me to the present moment, the only piece of normalcy in a world that was slowly beginning to unravel. Her presence was a contradiction, a comfort and a wound all at once. She lay beside me, curled up in the sheets, her face soft with sleep, the expression almost childlike. For a moment, I almost convinced myself that everything was fine, that it could all be fixed. But deep down, something told me I was lying to myself. It was always the same, this battle between what I wanted to believe and what I knew to be true. I sat up slowly, the bed creaking beneath me. My chest felt tight, constricted by the weight of something unspoken that had been hanging between us for too long. I took a deep breath, letting the silence fill the space around me, but it didn't comfort me. Silence had never felt so oppressive. I glanced at Clara, still oblivious to my wakefulness, her chest rising and falling with each breath. I wanted to reach out and touch her, to pull her into me like I used to, but a part of me recoiled. A part of me was terrified of what might happen if I did. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The nagging feeling that had been growing inside me for weeks, ever since she first told me she had lost her memory. The words echoed in my mind, and no matter how much I tried to drown them out, they lingered like a dark, foreboding cloud. David, I don't remember us. I don't remember our life together. But I remember Charles. Those words had cut through me like a blade, sharp and unforgiving. At first I had believed her. I told myself that it was just the trauma, the accident, the shock of it all, that her mind had simply erased the years we had shared in some kind of protective mechanism. I had wanted so desperately to believe it, to believe that the woman I had spent 5 years building a life with could somehow be restored to me. But as the days turned into weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that Clara wasn't just suffering from amnesia. She was choosing to forget me. I should have known. There were too many signs that I ignored, too many things I had dismissed as coincidence. The way she pulled away when I tried to hold her hand, the way she grew cold when I would speak about our past, the things that used to make her laugh, that used to bring us close. She no longer wanted to talk about the future, about our dreams. Instead, she spent more and more time away from me, her mind drifting somewhere else, somewhere I couldn't reach. And then there was Charles. I remember the first time I noticed it. Clara and I were having dinner one evening, the two of us sitting across from each other, the table set perfectly, the candles flickering in the dim light. But the conversation felt hollow, empty. I kept trying to reach her, to pull her back, to get her to open up, but she was distant, her eyes flickering to her phone every few seconds, her fingers twitching on the surface of the table. I hadn't said anything, not yet. I hadn't accused her. But then the message arrived. I had tried not to look at it. I swear I had, but the screen had lit up in the corner of my eye, and for a split second I couldn't help myself. I miss you, Clara. I need to see you tonight. Can we talk? It was from Charles. The words blurred together as my pulse quickened. My stomach clenched, and I felt something deep inside me snap. I could hear Clara's soft, almost imperceptible gasp as she reached for the phone, but I was already too far gone. My mind was racing, spinning with 1,000 thoughts, all of them pointing to the same undeniable truth. Clara's memory loss wasn't real. She was pretending. It hit me like a freight train, the kind of brutal realization that makes your entire body go cold. I couldn't even look at her. My breath became shallow, my hands trembling as I set the phone down on the table. Her face, once so familiar, now seemed foreign to me. The woman I had loved, the woman I had devoted myself to, she wasn't the same anymore. I wasn't the man she had chosen, not anymore. The person she wanted was standing right there in front of me, hidden behind the thin veil of amnesia. Charles. My brother. She was in love with him. It wasn't a revelation I wanted to face, not like this. I had hoped, no, prayed, that it wasn't true. That the message was some kind of misunderstanding, some isolated incident. But the truth was undeniable, staring at me from the phone screen. She had been waiting for him, hoping for him, even as she claimed to have forgotten our marriage, our life. She had built an entire facade, one in which she played the role of the victim, and I had been foolish enough to play along. I didn't confront her immediately. No, I couldn't. I was too shattered, too betrayed to speak. The weight of her betrayal was so much that it felt like a physical pain in my chest. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to demand answers. But instead I left the table in silence. I walked into the living room, the cold air of the house biting into my skin, and I tried to collect myself. I had to think. I had to understand why this was happening, why she had done this, why Charles, why my brother, had so easily taken what was mine. The betrayal ran deeper than I could ever have imagined. I could hear her footsteps behind me, but I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see her. I didn't want to hear her explanations. There was nothing she could say that would make this right. I had already lost her. I had already lost everything. And then it hit me. I had been played. In that moment, the rage and heartbreak that had been festering inside me for weeks boiled over. This wasn't just a case of lost love. This wasn't just some fleeting misstep. No, this was calculated. Clara had used her supposed memory loss as a tool to manipulate me, to push me aside while she turned to my brother for the love and support I had foolishly thought I would always have. I sat down heavily on the couch, feeling the weight of my own failure, the weight of the life I had tried so hard to preserve. But I couldn't keep playing the victim. I couldn't keep pretending that there was anything left to salvage. The truth had come crashing down, and with it, everything I had once believed about love, about family, and about myself. Clara wasn't the woman I thought she was, and I wasn't the man I used to be. This marriage, this life, was over, and so was my role in this twisted little game they had played. It was time to take control. It was time to stop being the man who waited for things to fix themselves, the man who tried to piece together something that had already shattered. I stood up, the cold air still biting at my skin, and I knew. I had to let go. This was the beginning of the end, and it was the only way forward. It's funny how quickly a man can change when he realizes that nothing he's done has mattered. I used to believe in the strength of loyalty, in the weight of shared memories, in the idea that love could fix almost anything. But I was wrong. It was all a lie I had allowed myself to believe for far too long. I stood in that living room, the same room where Clara and I had spent so many quiet nights together, watching the sun set or talking about dreams and ambitions we'd once shared. The shadows in the corners seemed to loom even larger now. The house had never felt colder, not even in the dead of winter. And it wasn't the temperature, it was something deeper, something far more suffocating. It was the crushing weight of the truth. Clara had been lying to me. And worse, she had never really been mine to begin with. She had always been Charles's. I had been the fool, the pawn in a game I never even knew we were playing. The realization wasn't just painful, it was suffocating. But as I stood there looking out the window at the cold, indifferent skyline of the city that had once felt like my empire, I felt something shift inside me. That feeling of suffocation? It was starting to turn into something else, something more dangerous. It was anger. It was resolve. I turned around, my heart still heavy with the weight of it all, and saw Clara standing in the doorway. Her face was still the same, that face I had once kissed so many times, the face that had smiled at me through all our years together. But it was empty now. Behind those eyes was nothing but indifference, and somewhere in my mind, I knew it had always been there. I just hadn't been willing to see it. She spoke my name, softly, almost hesitantly. David. I wanted to tell her everything I had been holding inside, to scream at her for what she had done, to tell her I knew everything. But I couldn't. I wasn't the same man anymore. I wasn't the man who would beg for her affection or plead for her to stay. That man was gone, buried beneath the weight of all her lies. I said nothing at first, just looked at her. And that silence? That silence was the loudest thing I'd ever felt. It was the sound of everything I thought I knew about her shattering, the sound of a marriage crumbling in real time. She stepped forward, her expression still soft, still hopeful. It was almost as if she believed I could be fooled again, as if this was just another misunderstanding she could fix with a smile or a tender touch. David, she repeated more softly this time. I don't know how to explain this, but I need you to trust me. I didn't want any of this to happen. I never meant for things to turn out like this. Her words didn't even reach me. I wasn't listening anymore. Instead, my mind was already racing ahead, calculating, planning, strategizing. I had spent far too long being the man who kept his emotions in check, the man who tried to salvage things when they were already beyond saving. But now? Now I knew the game had changed. Now, I had to be ruthless. I had to take back control of my own life. I trusted you, Clara, I said, my voice steady, but every word felt like a weight lifting off my chest. I trusted you, and you betrayed me. Her face faltered for the briefest of moments, but she quickly masked it with a half-hearted smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. David, please don't be like this. No. My voice cut through her like a blade. It's too late for apologies, Clara. You've made your choice and so have I. I didn't wait for her response. Instead, I turned and walked toward the hallway. I needed space. I needed time to think. But more than anything, I needed to get away from her. I couldn't stand being in the same room as her, pretending like we were still the people we once were. As I reached the door, I heard Clara's voice again. It was faint, almost a whisper. David, what are you going to do? That was the moment when everything shifted. In that instant, I realized that I didn't have to stay trapped in this toxic web she had spun around me. I didn't owe her an explanation. I didn't owe anyone anything. Not anymore. I turned, my back to the door, my hand on the handle, and I looked at her one last time. I'm going to live for me, I said, my voice low but firm. I'm going to take what's mine, Clara, and I'm going to rebuild, piece by piece, without you. I left the house then, and for the first time in weeks, the air outside felt like freedom. It felt like a breath of fresh air, a reprieve from the weight of everything that had been smothering me. The world didn't stop moving, not even for a second, and I realized that it never would. But now, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just existing in it. I was finally living in it. I didn't have a plan at first. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do next, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to sit around and let Clara and Charles destroy everything I had worked for. Not anymore. I had learned in my previous life that power, respect, and success didn't come from sitting back and letting the world take what it wanted. They came from fighting for them, and now I was ready to fight. The first step was simple. I was done being married to Clara. The divorce was inevitable. It wasn't a matter of if, but when. I had no desire to keep pretending that we could somehow repair what had been broken. But more than that, it was about taking control of my own destiny. As I walked through the city streets, I realized something else. I didn't need Clara. I didn't need Charles. What I needed was to take everything that was rightfully mine, my career, my freedom, my happiness, and build a future that I could be proud of. I had a company to run, Moo Corporation. It had always been my vision, my dream. And yet, in the midst of everything that had happened, I had lost sight of it. I had let it slip through my fingers, distracted by the emotional chaos of my personal life. But no more. Now, I would pour all my energy into making Moo Corporation the powerhouse it was meant to be. And when I was done, I would turn my attention to the people who had wronged me, Clara, Charles, my parents, everyone who had ever betrayed me. They would learn that there were consequences for their actions, and I would be the one to deliver them. But that wasn't all. As I walked toward my office building, the glimmer of a new possibility began to form in the back of my mind. Someone had been standing by me all along, someone who had seen beyond the facade and understood the man I was becoming. Her name was Misty. Misty had been the one person who saw me for who I truly was. Not as the wealthy CEO, not as the husband or son or brother, but as a man who had been broken by the people he loved. She had always been different, and I had always dismissed her, until now. But now, I understood. Misty wasn't just a potential ally. She was someone who could help me rebuild, someone who could help me take the next step. I didn't know where that would take us, but one thing was clear. Misty was going to be part of my new future, and together, we would take on the world. The days after I left Clara were the hardest. It wasn't just the fallout from the divorce, or the hollow echoes of a marriage that had once seemed like everything to me. It was the weight of being faced with the reality that I had spent so many years, no decades, trying to appease people who didn't deserve my loyalty, my time, or my love. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much of my life had been spent living for others. For Clara, for my parents, for the expectations that came with being the eldest son of the Fu family, the heir to a legacy of wealth and power. But none of it had ever been for me. All that time, all that energy, all those sacrifices I had made, it had never been enough. The very people I had given everything to had never truly cared. They didn't care when I succeeded, and they certainly didn't care when I failed. Now, I was starting from scratch, and there was something thrilling about it. Moo Corporation, the company I had built from the ground up, was more than just a business to me. It was the last piece of me that hadn't been tainted by family obligations or the betrayal of a woman I had once loved. The divorce from Clara had stripped me of everything I thought was important. But in the rubble, I began to see something new forming, a sense of purpose, a sense of self. It had been months since the fallout. Clara had moved out of our shared apartment, and I had reclaimed the space. I threw myself into work, building the vision for Moo Corporation, focusing on the designs, the collections, the innovations that would set us apart from the competition. I didn't need Charles's approval. I didn't need Clara's validation. I didn't even need my parents to tell me I was doing the right thing. All I needed was me. And in that, I found strength. But it wasn't just business that changed. It was everything. For the first time, I could breathe. I could walk into a room without feeling like I was being judged. I could pick up my phone without wondering if my next conversation would be a confrontation or an emotional ambush. I could go to bed without dreading the morning. It wasn't perfect. There were days when the weight of the past felt like it might crush me. There were moments when I found myself alone, staring out at the skyline from my penthouse, the city lights flickering like the stars I had once dreamed of. The memories still haunted me, the years spent trying to fix a marriage that was never meant to be, the guilt I felt for not seeing through Clara's lies sooner. But in those moments, I realized that healing wasn't linear. It wasn't a straight line. It was messy. It was painful. But it was also beautiful. And through it all, Misty remained by my side. Misty. She was the one person who had never asked anything of me. She wasn't interested in my wealth, my name, or my status. She had seen through all the facades. She had seen the broken man beneath the polished exterior, and she had never judged me for it. It wasn't like I had fallen for her overnight. It was more of a slow burn, a quiet understanding that grew between us as we worked together. At first, she had been just another strategist, someone I'd hired to help push Moo Corporation into the next level. Her reputation preceded her, sharp, cunning, and relentless. She was the kind of woman who could hold her own in any room, and I respected that. But as we spent more time together, something shifted. I began to look at her differently, not as an employee or a business partner, but as someone who got me. She had a past as complicated as mine, full of betrayal and struggle, but she carried it with a strength that both humbled and inspired me. It wasn't until one late evening, after a particularly exhausting meeting, that I realized how much I had come to rely on her presence. It happened quietly, like a subtle shift in the air, an unspoken understanding. I had been sitting in my office, staring at the final designs for our upcoming collection, when she walked in. She didn't knock, just opened the door like she always did. "David," she said, her voice steady, though there was a softness there now. "We need to talk." It wasn't anything new. We talked constantly. But there was something different in her tone, something that made me look up from my work. I put the designs aside and gave her my full attention. "What is it?" Misty took a breath, as if she was weighing her words carefully. Then she walked across the room and sat down across from me. Her usual tough exterior softened just a bit. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice quieter now. "About you. About us." The words hit me harder than I expected. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't know what she meant, but I could see it in her eyes. This wasn't just business. This wasn't just about our project or the company. "You've been through hell, David," she continued, her gaze unwavering. "And I know you think you're fine now, that you've moved on. But I want you to know that you're not alone anymore. Not with me." I didn't know what to say. I had spent so long burying my emotions, hiding behind work and the weight of everything I'd lost, that I wasn't sure I even remembered how to let someone in. But in that moment, with her sitting across from me, with the weight of everything we'd both been through hanging in the air, I realized that maybe it was time to stop pretending. "I'm not used to this," I admitted, my voice quieter than I intended. "I've spent my whole life alone, in one way or another." She smiled softly, a little knowing, a little sad. "You don't have to be anymore." And in that moment, something shifted inside me. I wasn't sure what the future held for us, but for the first time in a long while, I knew I wasn't facing it alone. The weeks passed in a blur of growth, both personally and professionally. Moo Corporation was thriving. Under my leadership, and with Misty's unwavering support, we launched our new collection. The designs were revolutionary, a blend of art and fashion that made a statement not just about beauty, but about strength, resilience, and empowerment. It was more than just a fashion statement. It was a declaration of who I was and what I was capable of. Misty and I had become a formidable team. She pushed me when I needed it, grounded me when I strayed too far into the weeds of ambition. I started to see her not just as a colleague, but as something much more. As we continued to rise, I couldn't help but think back to the moment when I had first realized I needed to let go of everything I thought I knew. Let go of Clara. Let go of my family's expectations. Let go of the need to please everyone around me. I had finally broken free of the chains that had bound me, and in doing so, I had found my true self. I had found freedom. But that wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. The fall of the Zhao Corporation wasn't a surprise to me, though I could hardly deny that it felt like some form of poetic justice. Clara's attempt to sabotage Moo Corporation by launching a plagiarized collection backfired spectacularly. I had no hand in the lawsuit that followed. It wasn't necessary. The proof was all there. Charles's reckless actions, his refusal to take responsibility for his own failure, led to the collapse of everything he had worked for. Their family name, once a symbol of power, was now tainted by scandal. And as for me, I didn't gloat. There was no satisfaction in watching them fall. There was only peace. Misty and I continued to build Moo Corporation into something greater than either of us had ever imagined. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about proving anything to Clara or my family. It was about us. About the future we were building together. We didn't have to talk about it. We knew. The snow began to fall the night we celebrated our latest success. The city was quiet, blanketed in a soft, peaceful silence, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Misty stood next to me on the balcony, her hand in mine, both of us watching the northern lights dance across the sky. It was a rare sight, a moment of beauty amidst all the chaos we had both endured. I turned to her, the weight of everything we had been through finally beginning to settle. "I'm glad I didn't give up on us," I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion. Misty smiled, her fingers tightening around mine. "Me too. I'm glad you didn't." And in that moment, I realized that the greatest victory wasn't the rise of Moo Corporation or the downfall of my enemies. It was this. I had found peace. I had found love. I had found myself. And for the first time in a long time, I knew that everything was going to be okay.